Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World, where every word matters. With me, Anna Kalczyńska. The European Union opted to keep talking to Georgia's pro-Russian rulers, despite the majority in favor. Hungary and Slovakia managed to oppose EU sanctions on Georgian government officials, blocking the union initiative and compromising Kaja Kallas, the EU top diplomat's effort to unpack the difficult situation around Georgia's aspiration to the EU in the context of Russian influences taking over in the country. I'm joined now by Tina Bokuchava, Chair, United National Movement. Good morning, Madam. Good to have you.
Good morning.
So Kaja
Thank you for having me.
Kallas used her first gathering of EU foreign ministers today to try to rally the bloc behind sanctions against members of Georgia's pro-Russian ruling party. But she lost. "I don't want to burn the bridges with Georgia's rulers," said the Austrian Minister for Foreign Affairs. So what's your comment on that?
Well, it's of course utterly disappointing when the European Union fails to act in support of the freedom-loving people of Georgia that have been in the streets for almost 20 days in the face of terrible clampdowns and violence from the government. Yes, it is our job to continue to defend Georgia's Euro-Atlantic trajectory, and we will continue to do so. Georgian public has shown remarkable resilience against government-orchestrated violence and terror, unprecedented detentions and mistreatment of detainees that human rights groups say amounts to torture, inhuman and degrading treatment. However, in this fight where Georgians have shown remarkable resilience, of course, we need the support of our European friends. And now that support can only come in the form of international pressure, and namely in the form of sanctions that are urgently needed. And so, of course, it's an utter disappointment that given the mechanism of consensus, Slovakia and Hungary, with the leadership, of course, of Hungary and specifically Viktor Orban, that decision is blocked at the European level.
With pro-European protests in Georgia entering their third week, also yesterday, it was another day of protests, and the President Mikhail Kavelashvili taking office, and also the term of Salome Zurabishvili coming to an end. What is exactly the political situation in Georgia right now? Could you please walk us through the process? What is going to happen? Are we facing a dual presidency right now?
Well, we're facing one president that was elected through legitimate elections, through a direct popular vote, and a de facto illegitimate president who was elected by an electoral college, the constituency of which is mostly consisting of members of parliament whose legitimacy in itself is not recognized other than by a handful of states, including Hungary and Slovakia, but also including Russia, that occupies 20% of Georgia's territory, as well as Maduro's Venezuela and Ortega's Nicaragua, none of which recognize Georgia's territorial integrity, but happen to have recognized the results of these illegitimate elections. Therefore, we mustn't talk about any duality, but rather of one president that continues to hold legitimacy, with whom, unfortunately, we have a great point of contention, and that is her unwillingness to pardon the third president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili, who paved Georgia's path towards Europe and towards Euro-Atlantic integration in general, and is being persecuted and has been serving a fourth year in political imprisonment precisely for bringing Georgia closer to the West. Unfortunately, the fifth president, Salome Zurabishvili, has refused to use her pardoning powers in relation to him. But nevertheless, that we believe that this is a moment where we must rise above all differences and unite in our common objective of saving and safeguarding Georgia's European future.
Yet the powers of the presidents are limited also by Mikhail Saakashvili at that time. So we are just wondering, what is the situation of the opposition today and how is it reflecting the society itself also? Do you, as opposition, have the feeling to represent the majority of the society in Georgia?
Despite the fact that significant falsification took place in the election, where, for example, the right to voter secrecy was massively violated throughout the country, credible exit polls that have conducted exit polls in this country since showed that the opposition was leading. Therefore, despite the falsification efforts, yes, it is the opposition that clearly had the support of the majority of Georgians. What we're asking for and what the public demand is also in the streets of Tbilisi is new elections that would be conducted not by the existing central election administration that is entirely subservient to Ivanishvili's power vertical, but rather an independent election administration and with no involvement with the special security services of Russian-made billionaire Vladimir Ivanishvili, who in themselves have been increasingly infiltrated by Russian security services. Therefore, new elections are the only way this crisis can be resolved. That is the demand of the public. And of course, we as the opposition will rise to the challenge of ensuring that once that election takes place, we revert Georgia onto a path of democratic European development.
All right, so you say the resilience in Georgian society is unfaltering, but yet the protests are dwindling, and understandably so. Do you think that it's rather a sign of a recalibration of the opposition's strategy, or is the society simply losing hope?
I have just come back from the protest, and I can attest that they are not dwindling. They are not losing momentum. The people are in the streets in Tbilisi on the main avenue, Rustaveli Avenue, but also in other cities, and showing remarkable perseverance. We are ready to be in the streets as long as it takes to attain the unified demand that now public protest has. One, that is the release of the political prisoners that have been detained completely illegally, including, for example, through raids of our political party office, but hundreds of others that have no political affiliations whatsoever and have been arrested, mistreated, in some cases tortured, beaten badly, only because they've been in the streets fighting for Georgia's European future. So the first demand is certainly their release, but the second is new elections. And I can assure you, you're showing some footage of the protests, but you would see similar footage of similar scale and energy if you were to go out in the streets of Tbilisi today. People are not stopping. People are not staying at home. People are coming out to the streets to take this fight till the end. And that end is new elections that will allow Georgia to have a government that represents them rather than a pro-Russian government that is clearly acting on Moscow's orders.
All right. So, Tina, with the disappointment and international community's response, which was definitely not too to the challenge, right, posed by what's happening in Georgia, we wonder how long can it last? I mean, let's face it, the Georgian dream is still holding strong. Do you think they're consolidating power, or rather, we can see more and more resignations to be following from the government, for instance?
Well, the actions of the Commission were certainly very strong, and we very much welcome the strong stance of Kaja Kallas in her new position. And that is something that the Georgian people shall express their gratitude for. Again, it's the EU decision-making mechanism that unfortunately allows for one or two members, such as Hungary and Slovakia, to essentially veto EU decision-making. Short of that, of course, there are individual national sanctions that can be used against Ivanishvili and his cronies, which is how the process also occurred, for example, in the case of Belarus and against Lukashenko. Going forward, the time frame is difficult to predict in advance as to how long it will last. But what I can assure you is that we are not giving up. Georgia is not giving up, and therefore the international community and those of our friends that believe in Georgia's European future must not give up on us either, because giving in to this Russian-backed regime would not only embolden pro-Russian Ivanishvili, but would embolden Vladimir Putin himself. And this is no time to make concessions to Putin when inevitably he will lose the war in Ukraine, and the West must show its resolve that it's ready to stand by all freedom-loving nations in our region that are fighting to detach ourselves from the post-Soviet debris where Moscow is trying to rebuild the Soviet empire, and to determine our own destiny, to choose our own destiny. And it certainly will be a European one for Georgia.
Well, counting on international community in terms of EU could be a mistake in terms that we see some cracks. Now, as mentioned before, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Austria wants to pursue in this avenue of communication with Bidzina Ivanishvili, whereas Germany, for instance, are proposing a coalition of the willing outside of the format of EU framework, right? So, do you think such an approach would be something that you could hope for in? I mean, is it a effective way of pressuring Georgian dream?
Like I said, the most effective way of pressuring so-called Georgian dream, but rather a Russian nightmare for most Georgians and for the region in general, is to impose sanctions. If EU-level decision-making is being blocked, and we clearly saw today that it is, countries such as Poland and other countries that believe in Georgia's Euro-Atlantic trajectory can choose to impose national sanctions. The United States is certainly considering, and I believe will, in the coming days or weeks, be pursuing individual sanctions against Ivanishvili and his cronies. And that is also, an effective lever of pressure to be applied on this pro-Russian government to stop the violence and the chaos that the Georgian dream has wrought upon its own people, and to allow Georgia to normalize political processes through a new parliamentary election that will certainly allow Georgia to revert to our European path. So national level sanctions and national action is always an option where European decision-making is being blocked. And on the other side of the Atlantic, a strong partnership with the United States administration, existing one or the incoming one, will also be key in decisive action in constraining this Russian-made oligarch in Russifying Georgia at a historic moment when, in fact, we could be opening accession talks with the EU 1 year after Georgia was granted candidate status to the European Union.
Tina, thank you very much for being with us today. Tina Bokuchava, chair of United National Movement, was our guest. We really appreciate it. Thank you once again.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching. For more news, more comments, stay tuned to TVP World. Thank you and see you soon.